Welcome, folks. I see a lot of people joining, so we're going to give it just a minute so that we can get everybody in the webinar, but it's really great to have all of you here. Hello, hello. I see the number ticking up. Lots of folks are coming into the room, so we'll get started in just a moment. More and more people are pouring in. Welcome, everyone. We will get started in just a moment when we have a critical mass. Welcome to everybody that has already joined. We've got many more people in the waiting room, so we're going to let a couple more people in and then we will get started. All right, folks, in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and get us kicked off, even as people continue to join. I just really want to give you a very warm welcome to the launch webinar for our new round of Civic Language Perceptions research. I want to welcome those of you that have been engaged in this work stream for many, many years now and have been involved in this journey with us. And I want to welcome those of you who are new to this research and to PACE and are engaging for the first time. We are really happy to have all of you here, and we really value your interest and your partnership. Um, Speaking of interest, it is very exciting that there continues to be really significant interest across the civic field in the work that PACE has done and continues to do on civic language perceptions. We had over 670 people register for this webinar, which I think really speaks to the enduring salience of the work that we have been trying to do on how to talk Bridgey. My name is Shannon Green. I am the president and CEO of Philanthropy for Active Civic Engagement, or PACE. And PACE is a community of funders working together to strengthen American democracy and renew American democracy through active civic participation. One of the things that we really pride ourselves on is providing practical tools to civic funders and the broader civic field that really helps enhance their work and allows them to achieve maximum impact. And I would say that the work that we're presenting today, How to Talk Bridgey 2.0, is very much in that vein. It is a practical, data-informed resource for funders, practitioners, communicators, and civic leaders who really do want to engage broad audiences without flattening their values or forcing false unity. So we were very intentional about what we named this webinar, how to talk about democracy under pressure. What we were really trying to indicate here is two things. Number one, it's really important when we're facing so many challenges with our civic culture and democracy that we have the tools to talk effectively about the work that we do and the issues that we care about and the threats and risks that we're facing, and to do so in a way that really builds bridges and promotes democratic values and expands the number of people who care about these issues and are willing to stand up for democracy and for the civic health of our country. At the same time, there's a slightly different meaning that we really wanted to indicate in the title of this session. Because what we're seeing is that leaders across a number of sectors, philanthropy, the civic sector, business community, and otherwise, are really under a tremendous amount of pressure to speak with clarity and integrity and courage about the threats to our democracy and civic health. And they're facing pressure to not say things that would put their institutions at risk. So we wanted to make sure that this guide really gave you all and leaders more broadly a set of tools and resources that are backed up by data that really help you all talk about democracy and talk about civic engagement and community and all the things that we care about in a way that really allows you to stand in your values, but doesn't compromise your ability to bring more people to the table. We hope that the guidance and data that we're going to present today is going to support you in that work and help you address those challenges. And as we hear from a lot of you and the challenges that you all face, we really wanted to kick off with this fundamental question that we all face, which is it really possible to talk Bridgie and vigorously advance more democratic values in the current political environment that we face? We think the answer is yes. I hope by the end of this webinar that you agree. I think it's important to say that language is not going to solve all of the issues that we face, but it will help us speak more clearly and courageously about democratic values as they pertain to the many facets of the work that we do. Finally, before I turn it over, I really want to thank my amazing team at PACE for bringing this project to this stage. Amy McIsaac, who is on the webinar today, really drove the last round of research and the production of How to Talk Bridgie 1.0. And Dr. Siri Erickson, which you'll hear from in just a moment, has been leading this latest round. And they've just been doing such a fantastic job providing this valuable resource to the field. So I'm going to turn it over to Siri now, but I want to remind all of you to please go ahead and put the questions that you may have in the Q&A so that we can get to them towards the end of the webinar. Thank you so much. Over to you, Siri.
So much, Shannon. We are going to kick things off with a quick poll to see where you all are on that question that Shannon started us off with. So, are you able to talk Bridgie and vigorously advance democratic values in the current political climate? We'd love to hear where you are on that question right now. Got a lot of responses coming in. Looks like the clear winner is going to be I'm trying, but I need more support to do it well. Some of you are standing confidently in your yes answer to that question, which is amazing. And we have a few no's out there. We hope that this hour that we're going to spend together is supportive for all of you, no matter where you are in answering this question. So let's dive right in. You can see the results there for yourself. All right. Here we go. All right. Before we begin, we have three very quick questions that we thought you might be thinking as you enter this presentation, where we're primarily going to look at a lot of data, but hopefully we can do some good sense making along the way. So why does PACE care so much about civic language? I think Shannon answered that question for you. We really want to equip you all, civic leaders, and the country as a whole to communicate well in this really critical moment in our country. We know some of you might be out there thinking, doesn't Talking Bridgie just weaken my position and force me to set aside my values? I hope by the end of this hour, you will have a no to that question. And what informs PACE's guidance? So we have been on the civic learning research journey for 5 years plus. And in that time, we have looked at a lot of our own data. We have also been in conversation with so many of you about how you're applying this data, what the challenges are that you're facing. And we have looked at research from many of our partners. So all of those conversations and all of that research is informing our sense making, even as we focus primarily on our new 2025 round of civic language perceptions research. So just a very quick overview of our survey itself in 2025. These are the 21 terms that we were asking people about. And you can see there are 11 of them that have stayed consistent across 2021, 2023, and now 2025. We have some new terms in the mix as well this year, and we're excited to show you the data on those terms. And then you can see the different kinds of demographic questions that we asked people so that we can look at this data from a lot of different lenses. This particular set of data was in the field in November, and we are thrilled to be working this time around with More in Common, who is our research partner, and want to give a huge shout out to PACE member McKnight Foundation, who funded this latest round of our research. This is what we're going to cover in our next 50 minutes here. So we're going to take a look first at what's new in this round of research. Then we're going to dive into 4 of our biggest takeaways from our new How to Talk Bridgie 2.0 guide. We're going to take a quick look into the intersection between civic language and More in Common's Hidden Tribes framework. We're going to give you a preview of our brand new civic language perceptions data dashboard. And then we're going to give you a little bit about what's next in the coming months. We will have time at the end for questions and responses. So as Shannon said, please put your questions in now so that you don't forget them. All right, so what is new in 2025? We have a new polling partner, I mentioned that, which allows us to do some new kinds of analysis. We have updated data on our terms that we tested. We have 4 new terms that we tested, and those are prosperity, checks and balances, law and order, and authoritarian. We have our brand new How to Talk Bridgie 2.0 guide and a brand new data dashboard, making all of this data accessible to you and to the civic fields more broadly. And we have data that will help us inform how we talk more effectively about democracy and the threats that are currently facing it. The number that you see on this slide is about belonging, which is the term where we've seen the largest net positivity growth over the last 4 years. So the term belonging has grown in its net positivity by 25% in just 4 years. So that is a standout civic term right now. In our survey design, we asked many different kinds of questions. The survey itself is available on our website, and you can access that in full later. But we really, as we have in the past, have been asking about term impressions. So we're trying to understand, are people positive or negative, neutral or unfamiliar on these core 21 civic terms? What is the unifying potential of these terms in people's minds? And who do people feel like these terms are for? Are they meant for me, or are they meant for someone else? We asked all of those questions in 2023 as well. On the bottom here, you see the new kinds of questions that we asked in this round of research. So we really tried to dive into ways to talk about threats to democracy more effectively. In addition, ways to talk about democracy itself more effectively. And then we have the ability, because of our partnership with War in Common, to understand what civic terms resonate with the exhausted majority. So let's look at our national top line data here. So this is all 21 terms, and they are ranked in order of their positive perception number. So if you're looking at this chart for the first time, 90% of Americans have a positive perception of the term freedom. The blue is the neither number, so 7% said neither. Orange is the percentage of people who have a negative perception of the term. That was 3% for freedom, and only a very tiny number said they were not familiar with this term. So if you look at this chart all the way down, there are a few really key takeaways that we want to name before we go into more depth and more nuance. First of all, Americans are still overwhelmingly positive on the vast majority of these civic terms. And we think that's good news to just name and not lose sight of, even as we get curious about where there are differences of perception among different groups of Americans. Most of these terms, so if we look down the list, it takes us getting to patriotism, several words down, until we get to a term that is under 70% of positive perceptions. So again, the vast majority of these terms have positive perceptions across American voters. Authoritarian was a new term that we tested this year, and it is kind of unlike the other ones. It's a term that we were hoping would not have a high positive perception, unlike the rest of them. And so you can see how that panned out there. 13% of Americans did say they have a positive perception of the term authoritarian, and we could do some more digging on that another time. A full 53% of Americans said they have a negative perception of that term. Two other things I want to mention here before we move on from this slide. There's two terms that we think are of particular interest to the civic field because they're widely used as we do our work. One is civic engagement, and the other is pluralism. Those are towards the bottom, but civic engagement and pluralism both have the largest amount of people who said they are neither positive nor negative on that term. So we think that leaves a lot of room for the fields and civic practitioners and funders to continue to help Americans understand those terms and feel more comfortable and confident using them. We're also interested in change over time. And so here you can see these are the 11 terms that we've retested in 2021, 2023, and 2025. Interestingly, in all cases, all 11 terms have gotten more positive, not by the same amount and not in equal measure between 2021 and 2023, 2023 and 2025. But on the whole, Americans are getting more positive on these civic terms. So the biggest increases that we saw this time around were in three terms: unity, which increased in net positivity by 10%, racial equity, which increased in net positivity by 9%, and civility, which increased in net positivity by 8%. The only one of these 11 terms that really still seems to be struggling and hasn't moved much over this 4-year time horizon is the term diversity, which does have a net positive increase of 2%, but that's not much compared to what we are seeing happen with the rest of these terms. So I did want to call that diversity is a bit of an outlier in this group. One of the questions that we still hear people saying a lot is, should I stop saying democracy? The short answer I think that PACE wants to give is no. Obviously, you control your own communication, but 71% of Americans have a positive perception of that term. That is an overwhelming majority of Americans who have a positive perception of the term democracy. 19% are neutral, and only 8% of Americans say they have a negative perception of that term. So, to us, that is a sign that democracy is still a salient term that broadly resonates across the public. Now, that being said, there are places and groups with whom the term democracy is under pressure. And if you look at the right here, we have the positivity breakdown for democracy by age, by political party, and by community type. And we see in that data a clear difference between older Americans and younger Americans. The term democracy is under pressure with younger Americans. Interestingly, when we move to the political party look, the independents are the group where democracy is under the most pressure. And then if we look to community type, to a lesser extent, the term democracy is under pressure more in the rural environment than it is in the suburban and urban environments. But overall, democracy is still very positive in the minds of most Americans. All right, we are really excited that today we are able to launch PACE's brand new How to Talk Bridgey 2.0 guide. Over 2,000 of you have downloaded the original version, and still every single day up until yesterday when we put this new version up, people were downloading the old guide. And so we wanted to get this new data to you as quickly as possible instead of waiting for like 6 or 7 months. So the new guide is out today. It is available for download. We will email it to all of you as well. There's a lot in there. I commend that document to you. Read it in full. Today, we're just going to look at 4 key takeaways from that guide. 1, bridginess is increasing, but there's more to the story. 2, political party matters a lot more than geography. 3, we think a key frame for talking about democracy right now and the threats to it is this sentence. Abuse of power threatens our free and fair democracy, and we'll look at the data around that. And then 4th, we're encouraging you to give people something more to be for when you are communicating. And we have some guidance for how to do that. So on the first point, bridginess is increasing, but there's more to the story. So like in our 1.0 guide, we took all of our terms and we looked at their positivity. We looked at how people perceive those terms either bring people together or drive people apart. And we came up with this bridginess calculation. You can see that in our methodology, which is available on our website, all the nuts and bolts of this calculation. The important thing to know here is that a lot of these terms actually increased in bridginess over the last 2 years. And so on the far right column here, you can see the change from 2023 to 2025 in each of these terms, bridginess strengths. The biggest increases in bridginess that we're seeing over these 2 years is American, which increased by 11%, citizen, civility, social justice, and racial equity, which all increased in bridginess by 10 percentage points. We have a lot more to unpack there and to say about that in the guide. And in future webinars that we hope to do as we dive in deeper. We did want to note there is something important that we all need to keep in mind. So by saying that bridginess is increasing, we are not necessarily saying anything about polarization in the country or even in perception of these terms. So what's driving the increase in bridginess is that Americans are getting more positive in their perception of these terms. More people are saying they believe these terms are bringing people together, that they are unifying in their effect. Those numbers are increasing. And at the same time, the variation within demographic groups also ticked up a little bit, which means that within our different demographic groups that we can look at, there's more difference, especially within religion, urbanicity or community type, by education, age, employment, and political party. So polarization within those demographic groups is slightly increasing, even as these terms get bridgier. So that's might be a bit of a paradox in people's minds, but we did want to point that out, and we will be diving deeper into that in future webinars. The second key point here is that political party matters a lot more than geography. And here you can see just a snapshot of how that's playing out for a few really core terms. So the color coding here, just to orient you to this, is if a number is in blue, that means that Democrats or people living in urban environments are that much more positive on that term than Republicans or people living in rural environments. So if we just look at that top section, you see for the term democracy, for example, there's a bigger gap between Democrats and Republicans on that term than there is between people living in urban and rural environments. One really interesting thing that's happening with democracy and some of these other terms is that there's actually a bigger gap between Democrats and independents, or in some cases between Republicans and independents, that there is always between Democrats and Republicans. But if we're just looking at the comparison between Democrats and Republicans, it's 21% difference, with Democrats being more positive. You move down to some of these equity terms, so racial equity, social justice, diversity, see a much bigger difference by political party identity than we do by where people live. And then on the bottom, we're seeing terms where Republicans, and in most cases, people who live in rural environments, have a more positive perception than their counterparts. So for a term like Constitution, Republicans are 22% more positive than Democrats on that term, whereas if we're comparing urban and rural, there's only a 3% difference, with folks living in a rural environment a little bit more positive on that term. Law and order is a little bit of an outlier there, but the rest of these terms follow that pattern. Taking just a quicker look at some of the in-depth data on this and how this is playing out with independents in the mix, 12 of our terms have a higher net positivity for Republicans. That's the orange circles that you can see here. And a few of these terms actually have the lowest net positivity for independents, not Democrats. But you can see some of the big gaps here, with patriotism being the term with the largest gap between Democrats and Republicans at 49%. These are our 9 terms with higher net positivity for Democrats, and you can see there's some really big gaps in a couple of these terms. So diversity has a 61% gap between Democrats and Republicans, and racial equity also has a big gap, and social justice. So really big gaps by political party. The similar kind of graphics for community type are at the end of this slide deck, and I cut them because we're not going to have time for them, but we are going to share the slides out and you can see this look for community type as well. Our third key takeaway is that abuse of power threatens our free and fair democracy. One of the things that we were trying to understand is how can we communicate in the most effective way with the most number of people about the threats that are facing American democracy right now. And so this was the question that we had in the survey to try to get underneath that. Sometimes people in power use their position and authority to help themselves or their group instead of following or enforcing laws for everyone equally or using the law to protect everyone's rights. What is the term that best fits this description? And then these were the options that people could choose from. You can see that there is a clear front runner, which is abuse of power. Corruption comes in second place at 21%, and authoritarian really isn't that effective of a choice with American voters. That's only got 14% of people selecting that one. And then the rest of them really kind of very small numbers of people. So abuse of power seems to be the most effective frame for helping people understand threats to democracy right now. And then we also were trying to understand what could improve people's perceptions of the term democracy, or how can we talk about democracy on the positive side more effectively in a way that resonates with even more people. And so to try to get underneath that question, people were given a pair of terms. So democracy and then an alternative. And were asked which term best describes the kind of government that you want America to have. And you can see that two choices improved or scored higher. People selected them more than democracy itself. So if we talk about a free and fair democracy or a constitutional democracy, that is going to have even greater resonance across a broader section of the American public. The rest of these terms, interestingly, did not add anything in particular. People scored them lower than the term democracy itself, or they were chosen less often when compared with democracy itself as a standalone. So if you want to improve the term democracy in people's minds in your communication, talk about a free and fair democracy, talk about a constitutional democracy. And then finally, we really want to encourage you in your messaging and your communication and your leadership to give people something more to be for. And so what I want to do here is I'm going to show you kind of a case study, a test example of what I mean by that. And this is the data that I'm using to set up that example, which you'll see on the next slide. So here is where we start to put together all of these different pieces of data to create something that we can put out into the world. So I selected for this example 8 terms to really look at. You can see the range of positivity from 90% to 70%. So they're all broadly positive in term positivity. Net positivity is the next number, just to kind of understand where the gap is between people who have a positive perception and people who have a negative perception. And then you can see in the next column our bridginess strength calculation. These 8 terms do range in bridginess strength quite a bit. So freedom and community are both up there at the top, 76%. At the bottom, we have law and order with 39% bridginess strength, which isn't particularly bridgy, but I want to show you how you can still use terms that are low in bridginess to create really strong communications. And then in the final column, you're seeing political signal strength. So in our Bridgey 2.0 guide, there's a whole table with political signals for all of these terms, all 21, also signaling for age and community type. That's all in the guide. You can download it. For our purposes today, I really wanted to focus just on political signals for these 8 terms. So you can see in this group of 8 words, we have a nice mix of signaling. We have terms that are signaling giving a bridgey signal, so they work across different groups. You are seeing terms that are weakly conservative in their signaling, strongly conservative, weakly liberal, and strongly liberal. So a nice mix of different kinds of signals, different signaling strength, and yet these terms all do have broad positivity across American voters. So here is the example. I live in Minnesota. And so I have been watching with my civic language kind of lens as the events of the last several months have played out here in my state. And so to orient you to, there's a lot of words on this page. I want to orient you to what you're looking at. So example A is a press release that was put out by a group of 60 leaders on Sunday, January 25th. That, for reference, is the day after Alex Preddy was killed. So these leaders were under a lot of pressure to say something. Pressure coming from inside of their organizations, from the public, from Minnesotans, just more broadly speaking. And so they put out this statement. A lot of people had opinions about this statement, and if you're curious, you can find those online. But for our purposes today, I want to name a few things. One, it is very, very hard to get 60 people to agree on putting anything out together. And usually, when you have that many people in the mix, the less you say, the better, right? What I've done here is bold terms or kind of similar concepts to our civic language terms that we have studied. So in the press release that was put out, you can see a lot of leaning in on community, which we know is a highly positive term, very bridgey, and just is a great one to if you're trying to speak to a broad group of people. Now, a lot of the usage is self-referential, so the business community is kind of talking about their community, but also a leaning in here on the concept of unity. They don't use that word, but words like come together, work together, cooperation. So there's a few of our civic terms in that press release. In the pink there, I have highlighted the calls to action that are in that statement. So calling for an immediate de-escalation of tensions, calling for real solutions, calling for peace, calling for cooperation. So just because I have all of this language intelligence at my fingertips, I wanted to see kind of how that original press release scores against a couple of benchmarks that PACE has access to. So we have been partnering with a company called Pluralytics. They have a lot of language intelligence and AI tools to help you evaluate how your communication, whether it be words or images or videos, even how it is communicating, what it is communicating in terms of signals, what kinds of groups is that statement going to resonate with. So we have a benchmark with Pluralytics called the Bridginess benchmark. And so we can enter in any piece of content and it will score that piece of content for bridginess. And that bridginess is very resonant with our PACE data. So this original press release did not pass the bridginess benchmark. Our partners at Metropolitan Group also have a benchmark called the Freedom Matters benchmark, which has to do with pro-democracy narratives. That statement also did not pass Metropolitan Group's Freedom Matters benchmark. So I thought, well, what might be possible if we applied all of the language intelligence and tools that we have at our fingertips? What might have been possible to say, or what could somebody say in the future? And so I used all of those tools. I used all of the language intelligence from PACE, from the Metropolitan Group, from Pluralytics, and did a number of iterations on that, which is what you see example B. So with 24 more words, this is a statement that could have been said, or other groups could say statements like this one. So here I've bolded again our civic language terms, still leaning on community, which is very bridgy, but also working in freedom, constitution, law and order, the concept of checks and balances, though we didn't use that term exactly, democracy. So we got more of our civic terms in here, and we also have several calls to action in this statement that are more pro-democracy, that are clearly taking a stand for democratic values, for constitutional governance, for accountability. And that statement B does pass PACE's bridginess benchmark in pluralytics, and also does pass the Freedom Matters benchmark in the Metropolitan Group, their benchmark. So I just wanted to show you this as an example of what is possible for you as leaders if you take advantage of all this language intelligence, all this data, the AI tools that we have available to us, the human intelligence that we have available to us. We can say something that is both bridgier and more vigorously standing up for democratic values at the same time. It is possible. And that is really our hope at PACE, that all of this data and the partnerships that we're able to create around building a civic story that strengthens our democracy, that all of that will help our whole field to say things that are stronger, that are more courageous, and at the same time are bridgier, meaning they're going to reach across a broader audience. All right. With that being said, I'm going to bring in a couple of our key partners. First, Fred Young, who is Senior Research Manager at More in Common. And Fred was an amazing research partner on this project. He really led the research design from More in Common's side. And so I'm going to bring Fred up to just give you one snapshot at how our two organizations are partnering together in this research.
Thank you so much, Siri. I'm going to talk to you about Hidden Tribes. So, Hidden Tribes is a mapping of the American public that goes beyond the binary of Democrats versus Republicans, because America is more than a 50-50 country. So using core values, we feed this into a segmentation that finds seven distinct tribes. You see the names there on the y-axis. And we also find that most Americans don't fall in the wings. They fall in what we call the exhausted majority, groups who are less ideological and who are tired of political division in America. So on this slide, the wings are the devoted conservatives and traditional conservatives up top, on the top two rows of every panel, and the progressive activists on the bottom row. And I'll talk to you about the four tribes that make up the exhausted majority. Moderates, they shy away from extremism of any sort, but are also civic-minded. You can see that reflected here. Democracy, civic engagement, and racial equity all perform reasonably well with them, and American patriotism and checks and balances perform very well. The politically disengaged, they are untrusting, pessimistic about progress, and pretty detached from politics, though they're still patriotic. This shows in the data. They rate most of these terms at about 50% or below, with one notable exception. 77 of them view the word American positively. Then we have the passive liberals. They're similar to the disengaged. They're also disengaged. They're also pessimistic about progress, but they have liberal leanings. So if you contrast them with the disengaged, the contrast is strongest on the word racial equity. 73% of passive liberals view it positively, compared to 45% for the disengaged. Next, we have the traditional liberals. They are idealistic, less ideological than progressive activists, and more institutionalist. You can see that in how they rate American at 65% and patriotism at 55%, higher than both the passive liberals and progressive activists ratings for both of these terms. So it's worth paying attention to how the exhausted majority perceives words. The wings, even though they disagree with each other, tend to have strong reactions to these words. The exhausted majority is more muted, and that's consistent with what More in Common has found. They are more flexible in their views, less ideological. And more broadly about More in Common, we are a nonpartisan civic research organization. We work across the democracy, anti-polarization, social cohesion spaces. Because we serve leaders and organizations who are all trying to reach broad audiences, it's really fundamental for us to understand um, how different stakeholders perceive the same civic language. So research like the Hidden Tribes, what you see here, and the Civic Language Project, they're mutually reinforcing. If you want to communicate across divides, you need to know which terms resonate widely and which ones are politically coded. Thank you, and I'll pass it back to you, Siri.
You so much, Fred. More to come on our partnership with More in Common. Next, we are going to turn to Cameron Hickey, who is the CEO of the National Conference on Citizenship. When PACE lost our last dashboard, Cameron reached out and offered to build us a new one. And he has just been such an amazing partner in doing so, to the point that today we have this dashboard available to you with our 2025 data. So Cameron is here. He is going to give you a bit of a preview of that dashboard, and we hope that you will go spend time there. Right now, it just has our 2025 data in it, but it will eventually also have our 2023 and 2021 data. Cameron is joining us from Australia, which it's bright and early there. So, Cameron, thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Siri. The National Conference on Citizenship has long depended on this civic language perceptions data. I found myself on, every other week, perhaps, trying to point someone else towards this research and using it to sort of explain some of the challenges that we face. So, as Siri mentioned, when we saw that it was not as accessible as it had been in the past, we thought we'd love to be a contributor to that. The National Conference on Citizenship is focused on making civic data as accessible by building tools and infrastructure in a lot of other contexts. And so this one was a sort of a natural fit for us. We were pleased to sort of take the initial cut of the data that had been produced by More in Common for this research, the 2025 data, and put it onto a brand new dashboard that is lives at civiclanguage.org. Today, what you can do with that data is explore each of the civic terms for each of the different measures that were created. So as a sort of shortcut, we're referring to them as positivity, ownership, and togetherness. So you can look at how each of the different terms performs, and you can also break it down by any of the demographic breakdowns. So there was some questions before and some discussion around how these terms and their positivity breakdown by particular ideological groups or by age and region demographics. And so you can do that yourself within this dashboard. And you can also compare the different measures to each other. So you can look at positivity versus ownership or positivity versus togetherness. Or we've even been piloting a 3D chart where you can look at all three of the different measures compared to one another. And again, break them down by those demographics. For me, I think one of the more interesting insights that comes out of this quickly is when you look at those comparisons, you can see the way that the different age groups really spread apart, right? The older folks are, the more consistently positive they perceive the terms relative to the younger respondents to the survey. And so that kind of helps us think about the ways that we communicate, not just in terms of the bridginess that we were already talking about, but in terms of how different audiences can be approached perhaps a little bit differently. Um, this dashboard today has the 2025 data, and you can hop on there right this minute and explore it and make downloadable charts from the demographic subgroups that you want to look at. And over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be loading in the 2021 and 2023 data, as well as the full a whole separate module that's focused on breaking down and sorting by all the different bridginess characteristics and net positivity characteristics. We're really thrilled to be working with Pace to do this, and feel free to reach out to Pace or to us with any questions, any feature requests. We're excited to build upon this foundation today and make it accessible to all of you. Thanks so much.
Cameron, thank you so much for all of your work to make that possible and for joining us from Australia at the very early hour. All right, so many, many things. This really is just the launch and the start of this 2026 research and analysis project that PACE is doing. And we invite you to be a partner with us in this conversation and in really using this data and that from our partners. So we hope you will get the How to Talk Bridgey 2.0 guide. We will be sending it to you, but if you can't wait until Monday for that email, you can download it yourself off of our website. Please access the interactive dashboard. You don't need a login. You don't need credentials. You can just go in there and start looking at the data. We will be doing some additional deep dive webinars on topics that are of great interest to PACE and to the field in the coming months, so stay tuned for those. We're also going to be traveling around to a lot of different conferences and doing group presentations. So if you have a group that you think would benefit from a PACE person like me or my colleague Amy or Shannon coming to share this data with you, please reach out. We would love to come and either join you virtually or if it works out in person. And then we also want to point you to the Pro-Democracy Narratives Project, which is an amazing body of research and technical assistance and coordination happening with our partners at the Metropolitan Group. Links for all of that will be coming in the chat to you. And so we encourage you really to lean on all of this good data in the work that you are doing. So more to come. We are going to wrap this up with a closing panel. And so Amy McIsaac, my colleague, is going to moderate that. She's been looking at all of your questions, and so we'll take some of those. I will be joined by Fred and Cameron, who you have already met, and also Kevin Kirkpatrick, who is one of our partners at the Metropolitan Group. So I am going to stop sharing my screen so we can bring all of our panelists up together and take some questions.
Awesome. And I'll invite Fred and Kevin to turn on your cameras so we can see your faces. Thank you so much. We've gotten so many good questions in the Q&A. I've got three I'd like to raise up, so we'll see if we've got the time. The first is from Laura. So Laura, thanks for your question. What's your hypothesis about why all these terms are trending positive? That in itself seems unexpected. Any thoughts on that from the group?
I'll take this one because I do have a hypothesis, and then Kevin, you might want to back me up. I think that part of the reason these words are trending upwards is because number one, we're talking about them more. They're more in the discourse, because people are concerned. Number two, I think it's a case of you don't know what you've got till it's gone. So I think as people start to see that some of these values and norms are under pressure, it increases their attachment to them. And the reason I believe that hypothesis is because that's what we've seen in a lot of the work that I've done overseas. And Kevin, I think you all found something similar in your own research.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Shannon. And I was really pleased to see in particular that the term belonging increased in net positively over the 4 years. Family and belonging is one of the 9 core values that we identified through our research, first on the global work we did in promoting democracy in the face of authoritarianism and in the United States for the last 2 years. Family and belonging is right up there in the idea of community. And we did hear in the focus groups that we did and in the national survey we did last summer, a real people are leaning into wanting to move past all of this polarization. They just don't know how, but it's there, and we just need to find a way to message in a way that encourages it, and we need to provide venues for people to actually do that. And what better time to do that than during our semi-sesquicentennial this year?
Awesome. Well, I appreciate those thoughts. We heard from somebody who was anonymous, but I thought the question was a good one. You started with a slide about how people should continue saying democracy, but then it scored a little bit on the low side for bridginess. So can you say more about that? Does it just mean you should use it in certain contexts?
I'll take that one. So we know quite a bit about democracy. One is, as I said, over 71% of Americans have a positive perception of that term. And most of the people who don't have a positive perception are neutral. So there's room to help those folks have a more positive perception. They're not so entrenched in a negative perception. We do know that the bridginess score is being impacted by the fact that there is such a large spread between people of different ages, and to a lesser extent between people of different political party identifications, and to an even lesser extent by where people live. So there are differences in perception on that term democracy, which is why it has a lower bridginess score. Hopefully, what you saw in the example that I shared is that even if a term doesn't have the highest bridginess strength, you can still use it in a bridgy way. And what our research is showing is that by adding free and fair in front of the word democracy, or by adding constitution or constitutional in front of the word democracy, that makes it more resonant and will increase the bridginess of that signal. You can also pair democracy with terms that have a more conservative signal, like patriotism or freedom or liberty. So there are ways to make democracy even more bridgy. And hopefully our research this time around is giving people insight into how to do that. Kevin, I know your research has shown some of those
Yeah,
options too.
absolutely. Absolutely. And there's a reason why the freedom matters narrative that is described in the link that the second link that Amy shared, we don't shy away from using the word democracy. But the lead is freedom. And we do talk about free, fair, and fearless democracy. We think that third one is an important one as well, particularly since pro-authoritarian narratives dominate with fear-based appeals and scaring people. And yet, I think you're right. We need to lean into it, and we also need to define it, because most people don't know what democracy means beyond voting. Which is why, again, in the Freedom Matters narrative, we're leaning into what it means in terms of checks and balances on power, what it means in terms of our own responsibility to be part of it and to engage with it. So yes, we shouldn't run away from it. And we should connect it to those core values that we're all talking about. And we should define it for people in ways that resonate and connect with their real everyday lives. How does a free, fair, and fearless democracy impact their ability to live their own lives and to provide for their families?
Great. I know we're about a minute to close. I just want to acknowledge a few comments that were in the Q&A about the term citizen. I don't want you to think we were skirting around that. Just to say clearly, we didn't ask for definitions of these terms when we tested them, mostly because we were asking perceptions. And so how people feel, positive, negative, or otherwise, kind of is a little absent of the sense of a definition. So we're really trying to understand kind of like the snap perceptions people had of these words. And then there's further definitional work we did in 2023's research. But citizen specifically, there's a whole universe there to dig into. And we'll take the feedback that's in the Q&A, and Siri will be taking that in as she thinks about what programming the field is really looking for related to this data. I think that's probably it. But Siri, I did want to say there was one question that was just like, are there going to be kind of cohorts of learning to apply this language? So this is probably a good question leading into whatever next steps you're going to share with the group, but there is of interest of that in the Q&A as well.
Cohorts. Stay tuned. Metropolitan Group already has several cohorts going across different sectors, including the environmental justice community, the public health community, local and state government officials. And so that cohort model is being stood up as we speak by Metropolitan Group. PACE is a dissemination partner for that project, and we will be bringing that into our network as well. And so strongly encourage people to go to Metropolitan Group's website, download those resources, sign up to be a dissemination partner yourself. If you're interested in a cohort, you can find more information about that there. And then, for people that just want to start looking themselves at the data in greater depth and doing it with your colleagues, with your, cross-sectoral partners in coalition. Everything is in the dashboard that Cameron has built for us. And so strongly encourage you to share that resource widely within your organizations and across your partners. And then More in Common also has additional research coming out this year that is relevant to this work. And so in addition to connecting to PACE, we really want to connect you to our partners here to get you the most support that you need, because we know this is not easy work and it's ongoing. It's a skill building process, but we have so many more tools than we had even 2 years ago to be able to apply this research into real world communication and community context. So thank you everyone for joining us for this hour. We will be following up with links and resources, and we're so glad to be in partnership in this work with all of you. Take care.